Hey everybody, welcome back to week, I don't know, something, 5 or so of the semester. I'm just gonna give a lecture, I think. Let's see, where are we? By now, your group should all have presentation topics, which is good because they start next week. So lectures for the next couple of weeks will be, I'll probably give a quick intro, but I'll cut together your videos into a similar format, a lecture-like sort of thing. I think that works and is probably a good way to get the presentations, to you in lecture-sized chunks, because that's how we organize courses, or at least how I organize courses. Otherwise, I'm going to continue. So I finished up talking about databases last week, at least what I'm going to say about databases. And then this week, security as sort of a contained in 1 week topic. This is something that is the bane of web development. You can't ignore it, and I think quite often developers have been, implicitly trained to not think about some of these things because insecure code often works, right? You can start your website and click the thing that you think the user should click and see the page you think the user should see, whether or not some other user can also see that page, or somebody who's not logged in can see the page, or whatever. And this sat down an article about whatever study, programmers will take the easy way out because of course we do. Of course we take the easy way out. That's what programming is kind of all about, right? You want to get the thing implemented in the most obviously easy way. This study, which was a little worrying, is okay. Write a thing was the task. These people were actually paid and told, somewhere in here, they were told security is the thing we're going to look at for this code, and even still, didn't get the thing right. With various, the details of how they didn't get it right aren't really important. It's that they didn't. And again, they didn't even when they were told. This is unacceptable, right? Sort of secure code is insecure code, right? This has to be in the back of your head for every line of code you write, or don't do web development. It's maybe something that can be ignored, right? If you're doing only desktop development or something, right? Where if the user does something dangerous, okay, that they're affecting their own computer. Here, the user does something dangerous, it's affecting your computer, your server. They're attacking your database, not their, locally stored files or whatever. A couple of links here. The OWASP top 10 that has just been updated for 2021. I'm going to kind of keep that open and refer to it. They do talk about on the page, up until now in this course, I've been talking about the 2017 because it was the most recent. So they've updated and kind of shuffled around. I guess they intend for their order to be meaningful. Thing at the top of the list is the most, critical for developers to think about. Maybe it's the most widespread or something like that. So I'll keep that open. There's this other link here of 25 software errors that's much more broad. This is not specifically web development. Interesting list, but again, not. Oh, by the way, OWASP, Open Web something security project. So yeah, distinctly web related. I'm going to keep that tab. So the things that I'm going to talk about today are not specifically those top 10. They're the things that I think, I see people do, and I think people need to pay attention to, but I'm not using the same list as them, just because. Okay, maybe first thing to know, you have a website, you're getting input, and input in this context is probably HTTP requests, right? That's generally how the outside world interacts with your server. You should sort of assume that everything that comes into your site is malicious input. It is an attacker. It is invalid. It's wrong in every possible way until you sort of prove otherwise, until you fully check that input and make sure it's okay. And on the same thing, the output, be careful about it. And again, maybe if you were really on top of the robustness principle, this is what you would be doing anyway. But just, again, like produce your output in a way that's valid and safe and everything else. And we'll talk about some examples here as we go. So even just something as simple as this select drop down. All right, so this is the, like, you have a thing and you flip down and you choose one of three options. The user sees these strings. What is sent to you is this value. And it's very easy when you're writing a, whatever code, again, with whatever framework, whatever tool, whatever it is on the server side, or for that matter, in client side code, it's very easy to assume that when you look at this thing, it will have one of these three strings as its value. But of course, we know that's not true, right? We know that anybody with developer tools can, obviously we assume this is a real form and not just some code on the page, but why can't I select the thing? Fine. Anyway, with the dev tools, and again, oh yeah, there we go, there it is. It's easy enough with the dev tools to go and do something like that. Or for that matter, to just maliciously submit the request, right? There's nothing that says wherever this form submits has to come from this form. It's just an HTTP request as far as you're concerned on the server. So, well, it could come from curl, right? So somebody could just as easily curl or wget how do you spell this? Right, so there's nothing stopping somebody from making this request by hand with some developer tool or whatever. And of course, that's not a valid assumption, but it's an assumption people make just because it looks true. It looks like these are the, well, okay, if I reload the page, it looks like those are the only three options that might ever get submitted. And this is part of the reason I arguably overemphasize server-side development in this course, because the server side is the only thing you're really in control of. You can say on some form client side straight JavaScript code, oh, you've selected an invalid option, or this field is required, or something like that, just as a user interface nicety. But if you want to actually ensure that the value is valid, that has to be done in the server, because that's the only place you're actually in control of what's going on. And presumably it's where you're going to store it, or do calculations on it, or whatever it is. So I guess depending what kind of input we're imagining here, right? There's all kinds of things that might be happening here. This might be like what I think that study was like a user sign up form. Okay, so they have to enter like, what's your email address, choose a password, what else, I agree to the terms of service or whatever. So did they actually fill out, did you get all the fields you expected? So just because the fields look like they're on your form doesn't mean they're going to get submitted to the server. Somebody might developer tools a form or do some manual request or whatever. Does an email address look like an email address? Do you actually allow, is there something about this user that you're not going to allow them to create a new account? Maybe they're logged in already or whatever. Has somebody entered a 2,000 character long email address? Maybe. Is that okay? What are you going to do about it? When you're producing output, I guess maybe remember that output isn't just characters, right? So if you're producing, like, again, I'm imagining here server-side rendered HTML. Well, if you have a less than character in your output, right? So if somebody has entered a comment or a blog post or whatever it is, well, most users, mostly, if they're going to, type a comment on a thing, if they enter a less than character, they expect a less than character to be displayed, which of course has to be turned into that. But you knew that, right? You knew this was supposed to be turned into that. But did you remember to actually do it? Like actually call the function. There is some function somewhere in whatever library. I think it's here in Python. Yeah. That does that escape and does that, simple character substitution, easy stuff. You could have done it in first year, but were you going to do it right? Here's a quiz for you. I mean, you're a web developer now, right? You've made web things. Okay, less than has to be turned into ampersand LT semicolon. What are all the other ones? There is a definitive list. There's 5 characters on it that have some special purpose in HTML and have to be escaped using these entities. Can you get all 5 before I flip the slide? I'm not going to do a poll or whatever on this one. Oh, do I not have them on the slides? Okay, let's see if I can get them all. Less than starts a tag, greater than ends a tag, quote starts and ends an attribute value. Apostrophe can also start and end an attribute value. Right, but of course, let's do the Python triple quoted string like that. So yeah, you can use apostrophe for attribute values in HTML, so probably should be escaped. And the one other one is the ampersand, because the ampersand starts entity, about character entities like that. What did I say? I think I said there were 5. Those are the 5. I'm pretty confident. But how confident am I? Am I confident enough to write HTML.escape myself? Probably not. I'm going to use that function. I have no confidence that I know the rules to escape values for a SQL query. I guess, again, I'm imagining here output is you're producing HTML. Maybe what you're doing is hand creating a SQL query. You probably shouldn't do that. You probably should use your object relational mapper. But if you're going to, how do you do it? How do you do it safely? What are the rules for escaping things in a URL? Right. So like back here, I wrote this URL. What if I want, like, apparently a question mark is special. What if I want a question mark in my value? How do I escape it? And this is one I guarantee you don't know the rules for escaping, like what characters have to be escaped in URLs, because that's not a coherent question. Like the rules are different for different parts of the URL. For the path part and the query string part and the host name part, there's different escaping rules for each one. You don't know them, neither do I. Let somebody else do it. So one specific, well, I guess in general, what I'm talking about here is you have to produce safe output. And again, maybe the output is HTML, maybe it's something else. Maybe you're building a SQL query. In general, letting the user sort of do unsafe things like put code into somewhere that you don't think the user should be putting code is injection. So the OWASP list it puts all of those together. So I'm going to talk about a couple kinds of injection here, with SQL injection being the first. And by the way, they have, like, down at the bottom of these descriptions of specific categories, they do have all of these, like, what is CWE? Common weakness enumeration. That's it. All of these, like, from whoever else, common classes of security problems. So SQL injection is the one I'm about to talk about, not specifically with Hibernate. but this is the kind of thing that is dangerous, right? I'm going to build a query and I'm going to build a component of that with string manipulation. And it feels like a natural thing to do. And it especially feels like a natural thing to do if you're doing something like this, where you know, in air quotes, that the user is going to give you an integer, right? IDs are integers. That's the rules of IDs. And, from one way or another, you got an ID from the user because they clicked on a URL that had an ID in it, or they selected something from a drop-down box or whatever. Okay, so integers are safe, right? So if this was a real thing, like this is a perfectly safe SQL query, assuming I fill in that bit. But who says the user is going to give me an ID just because I think they probably will give me a numeric ID? Maybe what comes back is this, and then you just do some string manipulation and allow the user to build that string. That's a really dangerous thing to let them do. They're about to do untold danger to your database, you're causing untold danger to your database. Okay, you shouldn't be doing that. So, of course, the thing that should have been done here is that input that came from the user should have been quoted. Then it's safe, and in fact, I think it has to be single quotes, and then like these things have to be escaped. And I don't think that's how you escape characters in SQL, but you know what I mean. You just have to remember to do that every possible place you ever use a SQL query. I'll leave Bobby tables for you to read on your own. Again, I think the reason this isn't sort of explicit on the OWASP list is you're probably not going to do anything like this, and you shouldn't do anything like this. This is a job for an object relational mapper or whatever. Make sure you use it appropriately. There are things that where you can sort of give raw SQL queries to most ORMs, just because there does come a point when the ORM can't can't express every possible thought. Yeah, something like this where you just have some crazy weird join and you are going to give a fragment of an HTML query to be built with. If you're using those, you should stop, right? Like pause at least and think, do I have to do this? Do I have to use this thing that where danger is possible? And then think, okay, I'm using a function call where danger is possible. Like all of a sudden I'm doing something that could cause actual real database damage. Okay, I'm not going to write this line very quickly. I'm going to stop and think about exactly what I'm doing here. Every database tool I've ever seen has something like this, where you sort of give a wildcard and you say, okay, well, this is probably the thing I want to do. Because of course, if you have to manually escape, you're going to forget once in a while. Probably this is easier and more reliable to use, right? Here's what my query looks like. Every question mark will have this like printf style replacement, but replacement with the escaped version of the argument, right? So this appropriately wrapped in quotes and whatever else. And maybe you're also getting there like wrapped in quotes, or like if it's a date object turned into however your SQL dialect represents a date, all of those kinds of things. Yeah, if you're writing SQL in your code, you're just asking, like you're going to eventually cause a SQL injection attack possibility. Honestly, I have no question of it. It's a question of when. Be very cautious with that. Okay, cross-site scripting, I guess, is another example of injection. So SQL injection being allowing the user to inject code into a SQL query. Cross-site scripting, you'll see it as XSS, is allowing the user to inject JavaScript code in general into probably HTML. It's the same idea. It has been sort of combined into injection in the most recent OWASP thing. You can see the cross-site scripting and injection have been unified, which is technically correct. I'll give them that. But I want to bring it up as a separate thing because it is kind of critical in web development. And this is just a question of like, what's text? And I guess this is what I was talking about back here, where if the user types, say, a less than character, well, the character that they might type or the characters that they might type might be something like that. If that ends up in the browser, well, you've allowed them to run arbitrary JavaScript in the browser of whatever user comes along. This is probably what you should be producing, right? If you produce this output, where again, this string gets escaped, okay, like maybe they've written a slightly weird comment, but of course that's not illegal, right? This is a perfectly reasonable comment to give, in Stack Overflow or whatever, like, oh, here's the code that does the thing. So this is the right thing, right? You wanted to escape the output, that's great. If you don't, then again, it's sort of arbitrary JavaScript code that can do anything JavaScript code can do, which includes things like, modify the page so that whenever the user clicks on something, the click registers as legitimately from them, but to do something that is completely not what they intended. Or you can do XML HTTP request things like make requests back to the server for extra data to populate on the page or whatever. This, again, there's a huge collection of things that can happen here, and including very bad stuff, right? This is a video. I will let you watch it on your own if you're interested in what Tom has to say about it. But again, self-retweeting tweet was fundamentally a cross-site scripting thing that fit in a tweet in early days of Twitter, where they didn't seem to have things as together as they do now. Okay, so once again, this is one that's conceptually very easy. All you have to do is make sure your output gets escaped everywhere all the time. This is probably something your templating system will take care of, right? So you'll have some kind of HTML template that where you say things like, I don't know, comment.body. I don't know, like you're putting together some HTML like this in your template. That's a totally reasonable thing to want to do. My demand here is that any templating system that's worth using and can be used and I would use in any way, shape, or form, the implication here would be this is the body field of the comment, which is presumably a string, passed through some HTML escaping function. That absolutely should be the default. If it's not, honestly, just choose different tools. It's not worth, like in the early days of like, is it the Ruby on Rails template? Like you had to manually escape things, which again, you're going to remember to do it 99% of the time, and that's insufficient. There are cases where you don't want things escaped, like maybe you have something that's pre-rendered, right? You have something that has already been safely turned into HTML, and you want to then explicitly, and because you've really thought about it, say do not escape this. And I don't know what template language I'm writing here, but I think you see the idea, right? I have something that I have thought about as a developer. I know is safe HTML because I produced it, presumably somewhere in whatever produced this field did the escaping and was safe about it. So now I say, like, I don't know, maybe don't escape. Like somehow I decorate this and I turn off the automatic default escaping all the characters, but I should have to do that explicitly and because I've thought about it. The thing about that is, it's very, and again, I see this all the time in student code. Like as soon as you have a text area, right, the multi-line text input for somebody to type whatever, you know, their profile, their comment, whatever, they want to type something like this. And well, if you've given them a multi-line text input, they kind of expect that the output should be multi-line output, right? They want it to look the same. So it's one thing to escape all their characters and say, no, this is just plain text. But, well, you know how HTML works, right? Like this, like if that's the input, I guess, well, okay, I want the output to be something like this. Again, I've given the user the chance to press enter a couple times. If I just sort of run that through my HTML escaping function and drop it in HTML, I'll get that. But we know what this looks like, right? HTML doesn't respect these line breaks that occur in here. So I get this appearance. And I'll tell you right now, 100%. If you have a text area in your project where I can enter more than one line, I'm going to enter more than one line, and I'm going to be disappointed and annoyed if it displays as one line, because any user would be. Okay, so the difference there is, right, so conceptually what's happened there is I took like the comment and I ran it through some HTML escaping. But maybe what I want to do is just simple, right? It's something like everywhere there's a new line after I'm escaped, replace it with a line break. That's not hard to do, but you just have to remember to do it. And then you're producing this HTML, which is much more like what the user entered. And we can argue about whether like maybe that should be an end paragraph, start paragraph, but at least it will look something like what the user wanted. And you should do that. Again, it's such an easy thing to do and such an annoyance if you don't. Some templating systems will have something that does this as well. Like you don't necessarily have to do it in code. Maybe there's some like, okay, take this thing and like do line breaks in a sane way, filter or something. Okay, so this is like, you really don't want any kind of formatting. You want just plain like characters, plain text, I guess. And that's fine. And if that's a situation that's totally reasonable, go for it. But what if you want some formatting, right? Like it's also totally reasonable to say, well, I want the user to type something like a comment or a blog post or whatever. They would like to be able to have like subheadings or bold text or a bulleted list, right? Those are totally reasonable things, again, in something like comment or blog post. Well, frankly, I don't want to give the user full HTML, right? Full HTML has like the script element, and you can like have mismatched closing tags, and you could have an H1. Like maybe I don't want the user's comment to have an H1 in it. That's kind of, it's just like formatting bombing or something in a comment. I want to somehow restrict the user. And that's where these like lightweight markup languages, seems to be the general term for them, come in. Markdown, the one you are probably more likely to be familiar with. I don't know, is there some example? Yeah. Right, where you can type this sort of thing and it produces this sort of thing as HTML output. So that becomes that. That seems cool. But there is a limit there, right? You can't have a script element in Markdown code or whatever. Or I guess the same thing, more general like category of things called wiki text. Wikimedia has one, and of course other systems have other similar things, but some kind of formatting that again can be done reasonably safely by users and exposed to users, but not allow them to sort of break your page. And I remember like having something like a missing closing tag is a possible security hole. Like there are things that can be done, or at least things like it can completely break an entire page. So you probably don't want that. This is one thing, like in Textile, I was really shocked when I saw this. Did you see what happened there? Right, like this was literal output as like LTGT, like escaped properly, but somehow the moment it became a valid code pair, it became not escaped. Like the default for Textile, which is another lightweight markup language, at least, and in all the implementations I've seen do the same thing, the default is unsafe. There is you know, like please turn on safety switch in the code. Like I don't even know if this is a library I'm thinking of, but well, it's not documented very well if it is. But yeah, there's some like, hey, please be safe equals true argument for that library, but you have to know to actually call it, which is a really unsafe and annoying and frankly incorrect default. I think that's bad. Markdown can do not full-on script elements, but it is a little unsafe by default. Keep an eye on that. Like if you're using some tool like this, make sure you have a look, like try to break it and just see what happens. Make sure you're using it in a safe way. Or if you really, really want to let the user enter HTML, and I mean, HTML is a nice language, people know it. Things like if you're allowing, I guess, upload of HTML or something like TinyMCE, I see they've removed the demo of their own product on their own damn site. You know, that WYSIWYG editor for the web. Why, seriously? There we go. There's some TinyMCE. This thing, right? Like fundamentally, what this is producing is HTML code. So if I don't know that, right? So this is it's a nice user interface for a user to look at. They can click and highlight and drag, and that. Oh, sorry. This is the HTML that produces that, not the HTML that it produces. But what it produces is, you know, a paragraph tag and a strong element or something like that as HTML. Making sure HTML is safe is shockingly difficult, or maybe not shockingly difficult, but if you try to do it, you're going to do it wrong, right? If you say, well, the user can enter stuff in here and they're going to be able to produce arbitrary HTML code, and then you think you're going to take it and sort of look, well, I'll make sure there's no script tag or whatever, you're going to miss something. There's just no way around it. The language is complex enough that sanitizing it is a real challenge. Something like Bleach for Python, the HTML purifier is a PHP library. This, I didn't know that. Somehow I didn't know this was from Mozilla. I mean, I guess if anybody, these are people that should know how to sanitize HTML. But the promise here is basically we will take arbitrary HTML and clean it in a way that's safe. And basically what they're doing is they're not like taking the input HTML and cleaning it. Like maybe what you should think of, their job is to take input in a markup language called HTML, parse it, make sure that everything is right, and then produce HTML as output. But it's not like string manipulation. It's like a compiling problem almost to make sure exactly what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Like somewhere in here, like when you run HTML through Bleach, you have the option to say, like, I want these tags, like only these tags are allowed to be used. Yeah. So, you know, and this is something like, I'm not going to allow, users are not allowed to produce H1s. Oh, and in fact, like their default list of tags is very short. Users cannot even produce H3s in their default list because, well, they're security focused. They have a really safe default and good for them. But maybe you think about it. You say like, okay, I want users to be able to produce these things plus H3 and H4, and I'm okay with block quote's already in there, but I'm okay with a few others, but the whitelist is the right way to do this, and they're going to take care of it for you. And you're also going to make sure that they can't, like here, the user is not allowed to produce an A target equals to open up a link in a new window. You could allow it by modifying this configuration, but you have to do that as a developer and decide what's safe and what isn't. Totally, that's the right library and the right way to treat it. Making sure HTML safe is sort of an arbitrarily difficult problem. Don't do it yourself. One of the reasons it's hard is just, again, the complexity of the language. Like, did we all know that JavaScript can hide here? Right? So if you were going to do this, if you one slide ago were thinking, Baker's an old fuddy-duddy, I'm going to take HTML as input and I'm going to make it safe. Did you know that JavaScript can occur in this spot as well as in a script element? Are there others? Where else can it occur? Where else can you put little fragments of JavaScript on a web page? You can put it, so okay, let's say you knew that one. Did you know this one? Are there others? Like, how many places are there to tuck little JavaScript fragment? Actually, this is not a URL. It should be this. How many places are there to put JavaScript where it will sort of be active as part of being displayed as a web page? You don't know. I don't know. I hope that the nice people that write Bleach and HTML Purifier do. Okay. Okay, moving out of the like injection category here, I guess. Well, no, actually, so this is mitigation on injection. So this is like, okay, if I'm doing something like blog posts, right? I have a place where the user can write markdown text and it's going to be a comment on the page or whatever. Well, I think I've used my markdown library correctly, and I'm pretty sure I'm sanitizing all the input correctly and producing the output in a nice, safe way. Have I forgotten something? If I have forgotten something, can I mitigate? So can I make the impact less severe of some security hole that is caused by just any one of a million things that can happen? The content security policy header that you can send, right? You send from server to browser as part of your response, is a sort of, I don't know, it's a inventory of like what is allowed. So, you can say here, like, okay, script source. So when I do, script source equals to load JavaScript from an external URL, it is allowed to come from me, like the current, the same server as this page, and I load some external things from apis.google.com. Anything else, the web browser should ignore. So the user, like, if there is some injection and somebody does manage to inject a script source equals evilsite.com onto your page, this says, dear web browser, please don't. Do not load script source equals like that, because I don't produce those. If they're being produced, it's a problem. That's great. I mean, if you can sort of enumerate these things, and again, you probably should be able to. Not every web browser in the world honors this, but most do. Certainly all modern web browsers do. So again, it doesn't relieve you from the responsibility to not do cross-site scripting or not allow cross-site scripting, but it does mitigate it if it happens. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can say in there. Where font, I don't know that loading fonts from an unknown server is a security problem, but maybe there's some way to turn it into a like denial of service attack against somebody else or something. Don't load fonts if they come from anywhere but the place I expect fonts to come from. Or images or whatever else. Where's my CSS allowed to come from? Those are perfectly reasonable things. Is there a can I use content security policy? I don't really want level 2. I mean, I'm happy. Let's stick to level 1. Yeah. So like I said, not every browser in the world supports content security policy, but pretty well. So I guess you have to give this X-content security policy header. Okay, they've done a non-standard thing. Everybody else, like it seems like reasonably modern browsers, and even not too reasonably modern browsers, Firefox 4, for example, will support this. So you can do it. It should work for almost all users. Great. Probably something that should be turned on as you start development, right? It's going to be a pain to do if you don't do it right away, because you then have to test like every single page and every single script to make sure you haven't missed one of the possible sources for scripts and fonts and where forms can be submitted. But if you do it from the start and it's part of your development, probably much easier to do. Okay, so now moving away from injection. So the insufficient authorization like category that I have here is, I think, like this is by far the most common thing I actually see in student projects. It's just not checking authorization everywhere. And of course, has to be checked everywhere because it's a security question. And I think this is, I don't quite know what the assumption is here. It's probably something like users only know about a URL because I've shown them the URL. But I mean, this is not, and I mean, I don't even bother to keep these links anymore. Like if there's a news story like this, I don't even bother to keep it anymore because it is so common. If I'm just on your site and I see this URL, it doesn't take a genius to think, well, maybe I'll try that URL. You know, if there's a small integer in a URL, adding one or subtracting one might work. That seems pretty obvious from my perspective as a just user of a system. But again, I think very often developers have this implicit assumption in their head. And again, very, very common in what I see students do in projects in this course. Some of you are going to trip up on this one, and I'm going to knock dock marks on the project for it. Yeah, you showed me a menu that had a link to all of my orders, because you said, with your ORM, you said whatever equivalent of select star from orders where owner equals current logged in user. And then you turn that into a list. But I'm not, I don't have to be that clever to modify that URL a little bit and maybe find somebody else's order. It means that in whatever code deals with that URL when the request gets made, I have to check, okay, well, what order is this? Who owns that order? Is it one of the people from who I should show it to? Maybe it's the owner of the order, or it's owner or a system admin, or whatever your logic is. You should make sure that's checked. So even if it's even if you have a URL that is actually hard to guess, right? You have some UUID and you think, well, okay, it's really, guessing UUIDs is hard, right? Where is it? There we go. What's your favorite UUID flavor? Oh, 4? Is it 4? We like UUID 4s. Because that's the randomness where you don't have to give any argument. So these aren't securely random. They're random enough that you're not going to get collisions, or they're actually quite predictable for a UUID 1. And I feel like very often developers use these as if they're somehow secure cryptography. They're not. These are guessable. But even if they're not, even if they're really not guessable, well, you see it over somebody's shoulder, you see it in their browser history or whatever, this URL might be a little harder to guess than the one on the last slide, but it should still be checked the same way. So if that's my primary key in my database or an indexed thing in my database, if I'm going to look up by it, that's totally fine. But I have to check again in whatever logic handles that URL. And does this exist? If it doesn't, 404. If it does exist, who's asking? Based on the logic that I understand from my system, is the person who's making this request someone who's allowed to see this order? If not, 403 forbidden. And it's an each request, right? It's a do it everywhere kind of thing. This is one where maybe your framework can help a little bit. So something like Ruby on Rails, you can give controller-wide access rules, like for every controller in this file or module or whatever the term is, here's my access control check that has to be done for everything. So it moves it from every controller to every module kind of problem, which is easier to get right. In Django, like you could use class-based views and say, okay, I have a super class that is check the thing, and then subclasses that do the individual, show me the order or update the order or whatever logic. But you've got to do it before anything actually dangerous happens. I think the broken access control here is a little bit more general than, a little bit more general than what I was just talking about, but like viewing or editing someone else's account by providing its unique identifier. Yes, I guess insecure direct object references is perhaps a very nice, technical sounding way to say this thing that I've been talking about. I'm giving access to the object and I'm not checking what I need to check. Basically, I guess maybe like if this might be more equivalent, more meaningful in some like made up ORM here, and web framework. This kind of looks like Django, but anyway, I guess I can't write anything else. And I think this is the equivalent. Like this is the sort of thing I see, right? A request comes in with this order ID, like in the URL, like the URL has been parsed by some routing software, routing layer that's already taken place. So, okay, if you want to view the order, you have to be logged in. If you're not logged in, forbidden, or maybe redirect them to the login page or something, and then show them the order if it exists. And again, I see it all the time because this code unequivocally works when you test it, but it's insecure. And it's if someone else comes along, right? If somebody who's not the owner of this order comes along and requests that URL, what happens? And probably if they get a 404, that seems reasonable. Hey, this order doesn't exist as far as you're concerned. This is easy and it's obvious, but you have to remember to do it. And again, if I can make any suggestion here, this is maybe the thing you have to keep at the top of your mind the most, based on my experience watching people do web development. Fundamentally, this last slide, like the confusion here was we've authenticated the user. We know who they are, but have we checked to see if they're authorized to do the thing or not? Well, version 1, no. Version 2, yes. It's also something that's easy to audit. And again, this is something I do like when working with developers on web stuff. Like the first thing is like, okay, well, let's go through, like, let's have a look at, every single controller view, whatever it's called in your framework. Is there some kind of authorization check that's done everywhere it needs to be done? Very first question to ask. Then we'll ask questions about, does it work properly? Is there, is it fast, or whatever else can come next? There's other spots here too, and I've never been quite sure how to say this, but I think maybe web developers remember for things like this, where there's like a controller and a user is going to request that URL directly. But is there an image that again, you're only allowed to see images that you own in your system, or there's like some like just little like you pop up and there's some JavaScript goes to the server and requests some info and displays it in an update on the page, some Ajax kind of request or something. Those are requests, and just because they're not like the URL types or the URL is clicked on directly by the user doesn't mean they're not sensitive information that you have to check. It's also easy to have to leak information in really subtle ways. So like imagine something like this, right? So if we have something like this in Courses, where like this is a user ID, right? This is our friend like Anna B Chan or whatever. Okay, if I hit that URL as the user who's supposed to see it, great, we see it. If not, but what if it we have Anna's marks, but you're not Anna, 403 forbidden, or Anna's not registered in the course, 404 not found. I've just revealed to you what courses Anna's registered in, and it's a subtle leak, but it's got to be done right, and it's part of the reason that I think I would prefer the 404 not found here. It's just either the order doesn't exist or it's not yours. I haven't given away if that order number is real or not, or if that user is actually in the course or not. Yeah, don't forget like those other things that can happen. Okay, I think that's my timing is going to be weird tonight. This afternoon. That's a good time. I'm going to take a break there. We'll take a slightly less than 10-minute break, come back and finish up the rest of the security stuff. See you in a little bit.